This is interesting because when I didn't know David before, but my brother's name is David Morgan, and my fifth great grandfather is from Wales. Apparently David's father is from Wales and came over here, and so I was really excited to meet my family. So he can talk about his farm and this beautiful piece of property that he lives on, and it sounds like a really cool place. The Lancaster House, which sits on their land, was built around 1850, and is it the oldest timber frame house in Oregon? Frame house in Oregon, which is really cool. So it's on the National Historic Registry, and I have no idea how that you'll loop that in, but I'm going to let you talk about your beautiful place and your commitment to Goodwood. David Morgan.
Thank you. So I just rewrote my presentation, so we'll see how that goes. So I'm David Morgan, and I got really interested in the wood and value conversation within this conversation. So what is good wood? What is value? On this project, this was a barn restoration program. Adam Gilbert was our timber framer, and it wouldn't have been possible without him. I sucked him out of Vermont. John Mull at Boulder Creek was incredibly useful for us and super helpful. So Plaskenwood Farm is a family farm in Southwest Washington. It's been in my family since 1941. In 2011, we got the opportunity for a Washington State Historic Barn Grant program to preserve our barn. So here's the barn when we applied for the grant. In 1853, Columbia and Rosanna Lancaster homesteaded this property that the barn is built on. And when we applied for the grant, we worked with Ken Ames at Portland State to get a history on the barn. And he worked with the methods of building and what was there, and he got to around 1860 to 1880 for the original build for this barn. The structure is as and hand framed, but the rafters were milled, so we was able to place it by the opening of the mill in 1860 nearby. So we worked carefully with the historic preservation people because they had really big restrictions on what we could do for the grant. So in dollar values, cash dollar values, I could have built a stick frame structure there way easier than what we did. But I think this has more value than just a stick building. So the farm has been in the family for 3 generations. In 1949, my grandparents did some repairs on the barn. At least one bay of the structure was removed. Concrete floor was added, floor for loose hay. And at that point, my father was about 3 years old. He's there in the back. And in 1949, the wood was still good enough for a 67-year farm. Hopefully my work will work for another 100 years. So to start this project, we had to figure out where the good wood was, what it was, where the good wood was. You can see some examples here, like it was, should we throw a match in and make s'mores, or should we restore the barn? As soon as I did the barn restoration, I had a 10-year maintenance agreement with the state as part of the funding. The leg posts on the west side were over 80% rotten. The top plates were about 10% good wood. And there was some interesting repair work that we found in there. But so where's the good wood? We walked around with an awl and a knife trying to find the good wood, and where do we do the restoration? So almost all of the wood came from on site on the farm. It was mostly milled on site with a portable mill. The barn is 75 feet long, the plates were 2 pieces. There are, the leg pieces came from a 200-year-old oak that probably came down in the Columbus Day storm. And it still had a lot of good wood left in it that we were able to use for the leg pieces. The leg pieces were 12 by 12. And so when I went to go find those values, good wood values for the grant, I called lumber mills. Can I get a 12 by 12, 70-inch piece of oak? Ha! So they quoted me that, they made it up, they said it was $1,000 for each leg piece. But where's the good wood? So in 1970s and 80s, my father was told to bulldoze and burn the oak because the fir value would always be more than the oak value. here are the replacement legs ready to take up the load of the barn. You can see the additional framing that went in afterwards, and then this is all the timber frame materials. When we went to do this, it's an exciting thing about timber framing is that these pieces of the structure you can't fix without taking the whole barn apart. So we had to figure out what was savable, what was restorable within that without taking it entirely apart, because that wasn't an option. So to restore the roof and the rafters, we had to recreate the top plates, hoping the tenon inside each was still good wood. We knew the plate needed to be replaced, but we had no idea what the top of those posts were like. So until we removed the plates and the rafters. Fortunately, the tenons were still good, and we were able to reuse them for the new plates. And some of these you can still see the original score marks from the person who generated the barn originally. Those marks were made by a very valuable person who wandered around the county building timber frame barns, value adding to the wood as they went around, adding their value to the process. The oak pegs were the hardest part of the process for the restoration. Those pegs were almost impossible to remove. I bent steel to pull them out of the timber frame to pull the top plates off. And I have some of those in the bag. So then, so we used a crane, we cheated. So TLC Towing put the two top plates on. So that's two pieces of wood here that we matched and milled and put into place. The good wood of the new fir plates was holding the barn, was at the top with the oak pegs that we made on the farm from the same tree that made the legs. So we've got oak holding the new fir into what's still good wood at the top of the posts. And then, so we had to redo new rafters. The rafters were 3-inch nominal. So we had to mill those on site ourselves. And then match those to the timber framing cutouts for the barn. We replaced this piece, but we kept the top top piece intact. So we had to, the new rafters bridged the old still good wood to the new good wood. And you can see, well, I don't know if you can, but the rafter edges there were like totally rotten. You could put your hand inside the top plate. But it was still good enough to hold the barn together. With the restoration complete, the barn is still in active use. 8 years later, we're storing oak slabs that we cut from another down tree that came down on the farm, and they're waiting for their next iteration of value. We currently have 2,000 oak seedlings that we're planting to work on 800 acres of habitat restoration that we're working on to benefit fish, wetlands, and the entire species chain for the lower Columbia River for all the impacts that have happened there from the headwaters to the ocean and beyond. And then the value of those oak trees for restoration is counted in the square foot of the live canopy of the oak tree and the habitat value that goes in conjunction with that. That value is tradable in Clark County and that any impacts in that habitat value is part of the conversation and cost of ground development. So the oak trees and the other structures have to value that good wood as a value, so it's not ignored in favor of development. It's not a barrier to development. You have to look at that tree and say that has this value, and you have to offset that value to impact it. So the oaks and other habitat values on the farm will be preserved under a conservation easement in the near future, holding the good wood on the farm for the larger habitat needs. This will put about 860 acres of 1,700 acres into conservation and protect it forever. And then, oops, oh. So I had my drone operator fly out of the barn. And should go. And so you can see the timber framing there. And so this is the oak peg from 1860. I drilled a hole in it to pull it out. And we made a U mallet for working on the barn. And then this is the commander that you make for mounting the pegs in. And this is oak from the farm. And then that's the barn, restored. These are the oak trees being grown to restore the habitat. In the back is the Lancaster house. And thank you very much.